Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's story comes straight from the darkest corners of New Orleans in 1847. It's the tale of an enslaved boy whose presence on one plantation caused a chain of events so violent, so unpredictable, that 3 generations were left in ruins. His name was whispered, feared, and never spoken aloud after sunset. Before we dive into this unbelievable true history horror, tell me, where are you watching from? And make sure to subscribe, because every story you hear takes hours of digging through forgotten records, lost archives, and real documented events. The boy's strange nature revealed itself long before anyone understood what was happening, and his presence created a quiet tension that people tried to ignore but could never truly escape. From the moment he learned to walk, he moved through the plantation with an eerie calm that felt unnatural for a child his age, and he seemed to appear in places where no child should have been able to reach. Doors were found closed, yet he was somehow inside rooms that were supposed to be off limits, and no one ever managed to catch him entering or leaving. He watched everything with an intensity that unsettled adults, because his eyes followed people with a focus that felt more like study than curiosity. Workers swore he reacted to things that were not there and often stopped suddenly, as though he was listening to a voice only he could hear. Animals sensed something in him too, and they pulled away or refused to approach, as if they recognized a threat invisible to human eyes. At night he wandered restlessly, and people often woke to find him standing outside their doors, as if he was waiting for something to happen. What frightened the adults even more was how often he predicted trouble, and how he knew secrets that no child should have known. The more they tried to explain these events, the heavier the fear became, and the sense that something deeply wrong surrounded him grew stronger each day, until it felt as if the entire plantation was holding its breath. The first tragic incident began on a quiet evening when the air felt unusually heavy, and several workers later said they sensed a strange pressure, like a storm coming, even though the sky was clear and calm. The boy had been seen earlier wandering near the main house, moving slowly along the hallway, as if drawn by something no one else could see, and although the doors were locked, he somehow ended up inside the study, where the plantation owner kept journals and important documents hidden. Moments later, a loud crash echoed through the house, and people rushed toward the noise, expecting to find an overturned shelf or a broken window, but instead they found the owner lying on the floor, badly injured, with no sign of how he had fallen or what had struck him. The boy stood several feet away, staring at the man with an expression that was neither fear nor shock, but something unreadable, something that made the witnesses feel cold. There were no objects out of place, no furniture disturbed, no footprints, and nothing that explained how the injury even happened. Some claimed the boy had whispered something just before the fall, while others insisted he never opened his mouth at all, and that the room had simply changed in an instant. The household tried to call it an accident, but word spread quickly among the workers, who knew the boy had been near every strange event leading up to this, and the fear that had quietly built around him turned into real alarm as people began avoiding him, refusing to stay alone with him, and wondering if the incident was only the beginning of something far worse. People tried to move on after the first incident, but the days that followed only deepened their fear, because strange things began happening everywhere the boy walked, and none of it could be explained in any natural way. The house staff noticed objects shifting on their own whenever he entered a room, small things, at first like candles flickering even without a breeze, or chairs turning slightly, as if someone unseen had touched them. Workers in the fields reported that tools they had just set down were suddenly found in different places, sometimes right beside the boy, even though they swore had been far away only moments earlier. What unsettled everyone even more was the way accidents began happening around him, events that looked harmless at a distance, but felt deliberate when experienced up close, such as buckets tipping over just as someone bent to pick them up, or doors closing sharply behind people, even when no wind was blowing. The boy never reacted to any of this. He simply watched with the same blank stare that had frightened them since he was small, and his silence made everything feel heavier. Some adults claimed they felt a chill whenever he stood near them, as if the air itself shifted, and one woman swore she heard a whisper behind her when she turned and saw the boy looking directly at her. Rumors spread fast, and no one wanted to be alone with him, because they believed the strange events were warnings that something much worse was building. Even those who tried to ignore the whispers found themselves waking in the night, thinking about him, and wondering how a child could be surrounded by so much uneasy energy, and how every unexplained occurrence seemed to connect back to him with a precision that was too perfect to be coincidence. The second generation believed they could control the boy through stricter rules and constant supervision. Yet nothing they tried ever worked, and their attempts only made the situation worse. They assigned the toughest overseers to watch him, but each one eventually refused to continue claiming the boy made them feel uneasy in a way they could not explain, because he always seemed to know what they planned before they carried it out. They tried keeping him inside the quarters at night, but he was found outside again and again, standing in places no one had seen him walk toward, leaving people wondering how he moved so quietly and how he appeared without a single sound. The new master who had inherited the plantation believed the boy only needed discipline, but every punishment he ordered ended in failure, because the boy never reacted with fear or pain, and instead stared back with a calm expression that unsettled even the harshest men. Some workers said the boy's presence weakened the strong and strengthened the weak, because those who tried to control him became sick or injured shortly afterward, while those who showed him kindness remained unharmed. The second generation tried teaching him obedience, but he learned nothing they wanted him to learn, and everything they wished he would forget, such as private conversations spoken behind closed doors or secret disputes between family members, that he somehow repeated word for word. The more they pushed, the more the house seemed to change, with strange noises in the late hours, shadows moving where no person stood, and cold air drifting through hallways during the hottest nights. The family became increasingly convinced that the boy was not just disobedient, but dangerous in ways they could not understand, and their fear grew into obsession as they searched for methods to control him while ignoring the growing warning signs that their efforts were only feeding something far beyond their reach. The violent outbreak that changed the plantation forever began on a night that felt wrong from the moment the sun went down, because the air grew strangely still and every animal on the property went quiet, as if the world itself was waiting for something dreadful to happen. The boy had been kept under watch that day, yet somehow he slipped out of sight just after dusk, and no one could explain how a child so small could vanish from a room guarded by two grown men. People started searching with lanterns, calling his name, even though they were terrified of what they might find, and the deeper they walked into the fields, the more they felt the air turning colder, until their breaths became visible despite the heat of midsummer. When they finally located him, he was standing in the center of the yard, perfectly still, staring at the main house with an expression that looked far older than his age. And just as the first man reached from, a sudden crack echoed across the property like thunder striking the ground. Windows in the main house shattered all at once, sending glass raining outward, and the front door slammed open with such force that it splintered down the middle, even though no one stood near it. Inside the house, several members of the family were thrown from their chairs by an unseen force, and one woman swore she felt fingers grip her arm, even though nothing was there. The workers outside watched in shock as lantern flames rose higher than normal, twisting upward in thin spirals that lit the boy's face in a way that made him look almost unrecognizable. The chaos lasted only moments, yet it felt like the entire plantation had been seized by something that used the boy as a silent center, a place where all the fear and tension they had ignored finally erupted. When it ended, the yard was quiet, but the damage was unmistakable. The family shaken, the workers terrified, and everyone suddenly aware that whatever surrounded the boy had grown stronger than anything they had ever imagined, and that life on the plantation would never return to what it was before that night. Rumors spread quickly after the violent night, and people began claiming the boy could sense things long before they happened, and even predict disasters with a calmness that terrified everyone who heard him speak. Workers whispered that he would pause in the middle of tasks and quietly say something like, "Someone is going to fall," or "the storm is coming," even when the sky was clear, and moments later the exact thing he described occurred with unsettling accuracy. Some said he predicted a barn fire hours before flames were ever seen, while others insisted he warned a woman not to walk near the well just minutes before part of the stone rim collapsed exactly where she would have stepped. The family tried to silence these stories, but the whispers spread like wildfire because too many people had heard him speak moments before accidents that should not have been predictable. One man claimed the boy told him to avoid the north field that day, and later a tree unexpectedly split and crashed down where the man normally worked, and this incident convinced many that the boy was either blessed or cursed by forces beyond their understanding. What frightened people most was that he never seemed emotional when he delivered these warnings. He simply stated them as if he were repeating something he had already witnessed, and then walked away, leaving everyone with a chill that lingered long after he was gone. Soon workers refused to stand near him, fearing that if he predicted something in their direction it might happen because of him rather than chance, and the tension across the plantation grew heavier as more people began to believe that the boy was connected to events no human should be able to foresee. Even the family members who once tried to rationalize his behavior became uneasy because they realized he knew things no child could know, and his predictions were too precise, too frequent, and too unnatural to ignore, making them wonder whether the boy was merely seeing the future or whether something unseen was in the unfolding house through him. The third generation grew up already fearing the boy because they had heard the whispers since childhood, and by the time they were old enough to take control of the plantation, their fear had turned into an unhealthy obsession that consumed their days and poisoned their nights. They watched him, constantly convinced that if they missed even a single moment, something terrible would happen, and their anxiety only grew as they noticed how he moved through the house without sound and stood in doorways as though he had been waiting for them long before they arrived. They tried to document his behavior, writing notes and keeping secret journals filled with every strange moment they witnessed. But the more they wrote, the more unstable they became, because the incidents never stopped, and each entry seemed darker than the one before it. Some nights they claimed to hear footsteps outside their bedroom, even though no one else was awake. And when they opened the door, they found the boy standing motionless in the hallway, staring at them with an expression that felt empty and ancient at the same time. One member of the family swore that the boy repeated a private argument they had whispered hours earlier, and this pushed them into near panic, because they realized he knew their secrets before they chose to speak them. Their obsession turned into paranoia as they began blaming the boy for every crack in the walls, every failing crop, every sickness that passed through the house, believing he was an omen of the downfall they had always been warned about. They tried to send him away, but each attempt failed in strange ways, as if something refused to let him leave the property, and each failure drove the family deeper into fear, until they no longer trusted one another and spoke only in short, nervous whispers. The tension grew so thick that even the workers felt it, and people began claiming the boy's presence was breaking the family from the inside, twisting their minds and turning their fears against them, until the third generation became shadows of themselves, barely sleeping, barely eating, and constantly watching for the boy, as if he held the final thrill of the fatal. The final night that ended the family's legacy began with an uneasiness that everyone on the property felt even before anything happened, and people later said the air tasted like metal and the silence seemed to press against their ears, as if the whole plantation was holding its breath. The boy had been unusually still all day, sitting in the same spot near the old oak tree with his eyes fixed on the main house, as though he knew something was coming, and as darkness settled, the feeling around him grew so heavy that even the bravest workers refused to walk near him. Inside the house, the third generation argued in panicked whispers about what to do, because they believed the boy was the reason for every decline in their fortune, every sickness, every accident, and they were desperate to end the fear that had swallowed their family across the years. They locked the doors, bolted the windows, and gathered together in one room, hoping that staying united would keep them safe, but their fear made the air thick and their nerves so tight that even the smallest sound made them jump. Just after midnight, a deep vibration rolled through the house, like something unseen had brushed against the walls, and although no wind blew outside, the candles flickered and the floorboards creaked under invisible weight that moved slowly toward the room where they hid. One of them swore they heard the boy whispering from somewhere inside the house, even though no one had seen him enter or move from his place outside, and when they checked the hallway, the shadows seemed deeper than they should have been, as if parts of the house were fading out of themselves. Panic spread quickly, and the family tried to flee, but the doors jammed as though they were being held shut by a force stronger than any of them, and the windows refused to open, no matter how hard they pushed. Moments later, a loud crack sounded upstairs, followed by the unmistakable thud of something heavy dropping and the sound of footsteps that did not belong to any living person echoed slowly down the staircase. The boy appeared in the doorway, without a sound, his expression blank and unreadable, and the room seemed to tilt around him, as if reality itself bent in his presence, and everyone felt a coldness so deep it seemed to reach inside their bones. What happened in the next moments no one could fully describe, because the survivors refused to speak, and those closest to the boy were found in positions that suggested terror without any marks on their bodies. By dawn, the house was silent and broken, the family legacy shattered, with no explanation, no clear cause, and no sign of struggle. Only the boy standing outside by the old oak tree, looking at the ruins with the same calm expression, as if he had simply watched the inevitable unfold. The rumors that spread across New Orleans after the final night became almost impossible to contain, because everyone who had witnessed or even heard about the events described them in ways that made the story grow larger and darker with each retelling. People spoke of the boy as if he were not entirely human, claiming that he appeared in places no one could see him enter and vanished the moment anyone tried to approach him. Stories circulated about neighbors in nearby plantations who reported seeing shadows moving against walls or hearing whispers that carried across the night air, always ending with the boy's name or the description of his cold, unreadable stare. Merchants, travelers, and clergy all repeated accounts of strange occurrences linked to him, sometimes describing fires that started without explanation, tools that moved on their own, or livestock behaving as if an invisible force guided them. Even those who had never seen him began to fear the property, and some refused to walk past it after sunset, believing that the boy's presence could somehow reach beyond the plantation itself. Letters and diaries from residents of the city mentioned that the boy's reputation had taken on a life of its own, and that anyone speaking of him too openly often became anxious or experienced small accidents that seemed to confirm his sinister influence. The story was no longer contained to one family. It spread across neighborhoods and whispered in taverns, in churches, and in the crowded streets, as if the boy had become a dark legend whose name alone could alter the course of events. People debated whether he was truly capable of controlling forces beyond human understanding, or if fear had simply magnified ordinary accidents into something supernatural. But no one could provide proof either way, and the uncertainty only fed the growing obsession with the story. By the time months had passed, the boy had become more than a child. He was a symbol of inexplicable power and terror, and every mention of him reminded people that some mysteries too investigate, too real to dismiss, and too haunting to forget. The final legacy of the boy known across New Orleans, fear and insanity. People still spoke of him in hushed tones, as if mentioning his name too loudly might call the damn trouble. Still snake cruelly man to down. The plantation where he had lived became abandoned over time, its walls rotting and its fields overgrown with weeds, yet travelers and locals reported feeling a chill whenever they passed by, and sometimes hearing soft footsteps or whispers carried by the wind that could not be explained. Stories of his survival and the chaos he caused were passed down from generation to generation, becoming part of local folklore, with each retelling adding details that made the legend even more frightening and mysterious. Some claimed that the boy had never truly left, and that his presence could still be felt in moments of sudden misfortune or strange coincidences in the city, while others believed he had been taken by forces beyond the world of men, leaving behind only the memory of his power. Scholars and curious historians later attempted to verify the events and searched records for proof, but many files were missing or destroyed, and testimonies were contradictory, making it impossible to separate from the legend that had grown around him. The legacy influenced not just the plantation itself, but the surrounding community, shaping fears and behaviors for decades, as people avoided the areas associated with him, and taught their children to respect the unknown in ways they might not have otherwise. Even artists and writers later drew inspiration from his story, using him as a figure to explore themes of fear, control, and the supernatural in works that echoed the terror he had inspired in life. The boy became more than a historical figure. He became a cautionary tale, a dark reminder that sometimes a single individual can disrupt the natural order in ways that leave permanent marks on people's minds and places. And though no one could explain how he survived, or why he seemed connected to forces beyond understanding, the shadow of his story continued to haunt the streets of New Orleans, ensuring that the memory of the boy whose actions shattered 3 generations would never be forgotten. Theories from doctors, priests, and locals trying to uncover the truth about the boy grew more numerous and more desperate as time passed, yet none provided a satisfactory explanation, and each seemed to only deepen the mystery. Doctors who examined him claimed his body bore marks of trauma and exhaustion that should have been fatal, yet he remained alive and coherent, and no medical knowledge of the time could account for his survival. Priests visited the plantation, hoping to find signs of divine intervention or possession, and performed prayers and blessings around him, but reported that nothing changed and that the boy remained eerily unaffected by the rituals, and sometimes even seemed to react to their words in ways that made the clergy uneasy. Local residents and neighboring plantation owners contributed their own observations, describing moments when he appeared in 2 places at once, or seemed to vanish entirely from locked rooms, only to reappear later with no sign of entry or exit. Some believed he was cursed by unknown forces inherited from previous generations, while others speculated he was protected by a miracle so profound that it defied all understanding, and that every strange occurrence tied to him was proof of powers beyond human comprehension. There were even accounts from travelers who claimed to witness events linked to him, such as fires extinguishing themselves or animals acting in unnatural ways, and they insisted these stories could not be explained by coincidence. Scholars who later examined surviving records noted inconsistencies that made it difficult to separate fact from embellishment, and suggested that fear and rumor had amplified ordinary incidents into something far more terrifying than what had actually occurred. Despite every investigation, every sermon, every medical consultation, the boy remained a puzzle that no one could solve, and the uncertainty only strengthened the legend surrounding him. People became divided between those who saw him as a living warning and those who believed he was the subject of superstition. Yet both groups agreed on one thing, that his presence had permanently altered the lives of everyone who came into contact with him. The more people tried to define his existence, the more they realized that some mysteries were not meant to be solved, and that the boy's story was destined to linger in the collective memory as a chilling reminder of forces beyond comprehension and control. The mystery that made historians question What really happened with the boy persisted for decades, and even after the plantation fell into ruin, the story refused to fade from memory. Because so many eyewitness accounts had been recorded, it could not be entirely dismissed. Researchers who later attempted to piece together the events found letters, diaries, and local newspapers describing incidents that seemed impossible yet consistent enough to suggest that something extraordinary had occurred. They questioned whether the boy had possessed some supernatural ability, or if the collective fear and imagination of the people around him had created the legend that survived long after his disappearance. Some historians proposed that environmental factors or unusual health conditions might explain certain aspects of his survival, but none could account for the precise timing of accidents and the almost deliberate pattern of chaos linked to him. Scholars debated endlessly over the credibility of testimonies, with some claiming that the stories had been exaggerated over time, while others insisted that multiple independent accounts proved there was a kernel of truth that could not be ignored. Folklorists studying the region noted that the boy's story had become intertwined with New Orleans culture, with ghost stories and warnings to children echoing the original events in ways that made separating fact from fiction nearly impossible. Even modern visitors to the plantation site reported a sense of unease and unexplained sounds that they attributed to the lingering presence of the boy, and these reports added new layers to the legend with each passing year. The inability to explain the events scientifically led many to accept that some aspects of history remain forever uncertain, and that fear and fascination can preserve a story far beyond the reach of logic. The boy's tale became a benchmark for the study of unexplained phenomena because it combined elements of survival human cruelty and apparent supernatural influence in a way that challenged every conventional understanding. Through generations, the legend served as both a warning and a source of curiosity, inspiring books, articles, and local lore that ensured the boy, who had shattered 3 generations and defied explanation, would remain a haunting figure in the collective consciousness.